EM Weekly starting right now, bringing emergency managers from around the world together to learn, share and collaborate.
Hey, welcome to the second live edition of the EM Weekly Show. Excited to be doing lives. It was a decision that we kind of went forward for to just to kind of bring some additional exposure to emergency management and some interaction as well, because when you're here on the live show through the so different, whether you're on, if you're watching it on Facebook, whether you're watching it on YouTube, you can interact with us, ask us questions, and I think it's going to bring a different dynamic to the show and with what we're doing here with EM Weekly. And today I have with me Dan Scott, who I've got to know better over the last year or so. We've known each other for a couple years now, but last year or so, we become friends. Went to the Executive Academy together over at the EMI. We were on the same team, Team 6. Go Team 6! Right?
Go Team 6.
And we worked on a really cool project with public warning notification systems, and so Dan's a very well-rounded emergency manager, and we'll let him introduce himself here in a minute. But first, I want to kind of bring in some sad news. And in the world of emergency management, you know, when one of our own pass away, it doesn't make the news, right? We don't see parades. We don't see huge events that are happening. And just sort of amongst ourselves, we know who the leaders are. We know who the thought leaders are in emergency management, and we lost one on Monday. There's David McIntyre from the Bush School of Public Policy, and he was the founding director of Homeland Security graduate certificate programs at the Bush School of Public Policy, and really developed the Homeland Security track, and has written multiple books on emergency management and Homeland Security. And he was working on a 4-volume series when he passed, and so there's some unfinished work that's out there coming from him, and it's really sad. And I actually spoke to a couple of people that know him well, and it came kind of a shock, and I know he was dealing with some personal health issues, but it looked like he was coming out of the woods on it, and unfortunately he succumbed to that aspect of it. But Daniel, you were at the Higher Education Symposium online, and you got to hear some of what he had to say, and I know that you know his work a little bit better. What do you think about this? You know, I mean, the shocking news with losing with David on Monday.
Well, like you said, I didn't know him personally. You know, I've gotten to see him speak a few times, but when I heard the news on Monday or Tuesday, actually, it's kind of like a punch in the gut. You just heard him talk. I just heard him talk literally a week ago today, and hearing him talk was a great pleasure. You know, and the way they did the higher ed symposium this year was done via Zoom online because of COVID-19. So his audience was huge, and you hear. He's just got such a great reputation in the industry, and even in his talk, he talked about how he was getting over some health issues, and you know, he was getting ready to start working again, start writing in his start finishing his volumes, and I was excited to hear him talk. I mean, to hear him talk was a great pleasure. I mean, to know his history in Homeland Security and how he brought that into emergency management and all the lives he's changed in teaching. And he's developed a lot of curriculum that we still use today.
Now, you know, when we talk about the emergency manager purist, if you will, we talk about, you know, what it means to be an emergency manager, and it's kind of how we've been folded into Homeland Security over the last few years, and there's a little bit of bleed over on either side of it. But it seems like, reading what McIntyre has done, that he sees that there's I don't want to say a divide in a negative way, but there's definitely a division in responsibilities and jobs of the two. What was his philosophy on that?
Well, he wanted to bring everybody together. He wanted everybody to work as a team. And even in his talk last week, he made a point to say that and say how it was our responsibility to learn different aspects of the profession so that we could apply it, and not only that, teach others to apply it. He's very deliberate, and when he spoke about how if he didn't know something, he learned it, and he would take the time to go after those who were masters in it, who were experts in it, and learn from them so that he could apply it in his practicing, but also in his teaching. So he wanted everybody to go out of their way to work together, to learn what everybody else was doing so that they could work better in collaboration together. And it was very apparent in his talk last week that that's what he believed.
When we lose a thinker like David, somebody who is pushing the profession forward, again, you get taken aback a little bit, and it just kind of shows that we need to really, really, really have great thinkers in emergency management, in Homeland Security, and really push it forward, because we have a new generation coming up behind us, and we're going to kind of segue into a little bit why we have Daniel here as well. We have a new generation coming up behind us. I know I could, just from the research, everything that's going on, emergency management is changing on a regular basis. We have, it's no longer the acceptable to have somebody who isn't trained in the field of emergency management to sit in the role as manager for either your city, county, or local jurisdiction. So what does that mean with that void? Who can fill that void? We don't have a name necessarily, but what type of person can come back and fill that void that David is now left with his passing?
Well, I think ultimately each individual should be tasked with filling that void, especially in their own office, building additional leaders, building additional emergency management professionals to go out and to better and protect the communities in which they serve, or which they will serve. If they, with EM, you find that a lot of it it's mobile. You can get moved all over the place. Even if you're in one office, you can go lend a hand in another jurisdiction. So it's definitely of benefit for you as an individual that is practicing EM, working in EM, to build the others up around you, but to also make yourself the best EM you can be. And you find that pretty often in emergency management, at least right now, that they're stagnant. They're getting a little bit of complacency. Something doesn't happen for a long time, and you kind of let yourself fall back into something. You got to be constantly. It's got to be a conscious choice to make yourself better.
There are various different places where emergency managers can go and get trained. In the craft. I'll go further and call it a craft, right? You can take courses at EMI, Harvard with the NPLI. You have the Bush School with their certificate in Homeland Security, where I teach at UCI with the certificate in emergency management as well. There's places where you can go to get education. So a lot of these places are online as well. And that's not even saying you have to go and get a master's or a PhD in emergency management, or if you already have your degree. There's places to go and learn, and also just like I said, there's a reason why I have a reading list, right, here at EM Weekly is to read the books, read what's coming out, and like David's books here that are, he had a 4-series book coming out. Obviously, he only had 2 of them completed, but that being said, is reading those things and learning from each other and having this open dialogue. And then, I don't necessarily want to put EM Weekly on that plane, but to be able to learn from each other. And I think this is a great avenue for doing this. But we're going to be moving a little bit more into the education, if you will, or the student or the lifelong learner, as you will, with revamping and relaunching the EM Student Show with Daniel as our host. So first of all, Daniel, thank you for stepping up and taking the reins of that show. I know you and I spoke about this a long time ago when we were at EMI about how we can get you more involved with growing emergency management. And I think that this is a really great avenue for you. So what's your philosophy on taking EM student forward?
Well, first, just let me say thank you for, giving me the opportunity to do so. I feel, I'm grateful that I was chosen to be the individual that you want to move the show forward with. But my philosophy is going to be, just how can I make people better at emergency management, but also implementing leadership and other aspects of our day-to-day duties in emergency management or homeland security, or even if it's a secondary function. How do you make yourself better? Being that lifelong learner, as you just mentioned. I think that, like I said earlier, that's a conscious choice that we make to continue to make ourselves better, and by making ourselves better, we can make others better. And that's a big philosophy of mine: is to how do I make others better? How do I make better EMs, better people better at their jobs, whether it's emergency management or not? How do I build people up? And I think with emergency management in general, one of the reasons why I really wanted to jump at this opportunity was as to build to concentrate on those who want to come in and learn EM and the foundations. And it's great for even those who have been in the industry for 20 years to still go back to the foundations and learn the foundations, and keep yourself refreshed on those. And things change, like you said earlier. Emergency management, it's an ever-changing field. It's constantly growing. We're in our infancy as a profession, so we need to continue growing that as a person, as our individuals as well, so that we can make the profession better. So that's my whole goal: is how do I build upon the knowledge of an EM, but also give them extra tools that they would need that they may not know about. And you find that even experienced emergency managers don't know the simplest things of where to go get certain education, like EMI or the Center for Domestic Preparedness. Those places that are there, that are free, grant-funded courses that they could go attend, that they didn't never heard of. So how do we get that word out? And I want to go one step further to say that, hey, I put EM Weekly on that field, of being able to educate people on emergency management and to keep moving that forward. Each show you do gets better. It helps build people, right? And that's what I want to do with the EM student.
Well, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to discuss the future of emergency management education and where you see it going.
Seconds count during an emergency. That's why at Titan HST, we're always inventing new technology to help people stay safe and help people who can provide help get connected with people who need help. At Titan HST, we've deployed mesh networking, allowing emergency communication even when networks are down, augmented reality, and real-time translation. We believe in the power of people to help each other stay safe and thrive.
Welcome back from that quick ad. And, without, Titan HST is our sponsor right now. Without them, we could not bring you the quality content that we have. So please check them out. Just go to the, titanhst.com, click on the link, just see what they got going on there. There's some really cool stuff they have coming out specifically with, to help everybody open back up with trace tracking, density monitoring, TMed, if you will, for the tech, for medicine, for remote medicine. It's a great product, a great team, and I'm proud to be part of them and being sponsored by Titan HST. Daniel, before we jumped onto the break, I alluded to the fact that the state of emergency management education is changing, and so much so that we've seen programs come and go. One of the PhD programs that were out there for a PhD in emergency management, I think one of the only pure ones that were out there, there's only a couple, has closed their doors after this semester. What is the state of emergency management education? And or let me be bold and ask this question: should we even be looking at curriculum that's emergency management only at the PhD level?
Absolutely. I mean, even when you say EM only, I mean, there's so much that goes into EM that it can be a topic that it can be molded to EM. So absolutely, I feel that there should be PhD programs out there that are designated for EM. But what we find is that it's and I think I mentioned this to you before in a previous conversation, it's not necessarily in uniform. You see programs who are PhDs in emergency management, doctorates of emergency management. Then you got those that are emergency management, homeland security, disaster management, crisis management, whatever they call it. The concepts are there. They want it to be emergency management, and they want you to apply it in emergency management. So yeah, absolutely, I feel that. But what I personally believe is I believe there needs to be more practitioner and those who, between the practitioner and those who teach it. There needs to be more collaboration between those who develop the curriculum and those who are out there doing it every day. And I think there's a divide right now, and I know that there's a big push to close that divide, to bring that barrier and remove it. And that's one of the reasons why I attend the higher ed symposium. Is because a lot of the individuals that are attending that are the instructors, the teachers. They go out and they have programs at their institutions, and they teach emergency management. And as a practitioner, and especially one who's transitioning into higher ed to be more of a teacher, I want to help build to bridge that gap between the two. There is a divide there, and both sides know it. They know there's a divide between what's taught and what's practiced, and how do we bring that together? And EMI, their higher ed program, has done a great job, and I think this year was one of the best turnouts simply because of the Zoom. Zoom has changed the world now. You got to say that being able to teleconference has changed the world, and it took COVID-19 to do that. And it doesn't change the fact that it feels good to be able to walk into a room, shake someone's hand, sit down, and have a conversation, but it opens up doors. And what it did with this year is a lot more people were able to watch these conversations and watch these presentations and expand on their thinking a little bit on teaching.
Absolutely. I was teaching my final class yesterday for the semester at UCI, and we discussed emergency operations centers and technology and how during this COVID crisis there were emergency operations centers, EOCs, that were set up. And I'm putting them in air quotes here for those of you that watching the podcast, or not watching but listening. They were virtual EOCs, right? I mean, web EOC and that type of technology has been around for a long time. But using Zoom or any other kind of conferencing software actually opens up the ability to react and to support remotely. So I just think those of us in emergency management need to embrace technology. But yes, going back to what your point was, is this is also opening the ability for those of us that are on the West Coast to teach people that are on the East Coast, right? A matter of fact, in my class, I had some students that were in Boston this time around. So yeah, I think it's interesting to be able to share ideas and not to be stovepiped when it comes into it. Michael on Facebook, he comes out and he's a great guy. He does a lot of good work in emergency management. He writes as well and has a really great series on the Sounding magazine, and he says, know your history, right? And absolutely, Michael, I agree with you 100%. Is know the history and know where we've come from, and don't forget that we can still learn from those, the civil defense era, right? And when we started. But however, I think it's interesting that when you see articles that are in the Emergency Management magazine that talks about how these great retirements that are occurring, this generation shift, and that we're losing the institutional knowledge of emergency managers that are moving on. And I kind of want to call BS on that a little bit. It's an older story. I think I spoke about it last year as well. But I think as we move people from being practitioner EMs into education, I think that's very important. But I also think, and I'm going to pick on Michael again because he chimed in. Mike retired. He now does a bunch of different things in the community with his online magazine and the videos that they produce that are really well done. It's mostly about the Bay Area and whatnot, but it's still some really cool stuff, and it can be shared across the emergency management world. I think it's the idea that we do have institutional knowledge that we can share with the next generation coming up behind us, that we don't repeat the same mistakes, and that's why you need to know the history of what happened in the past. I think it's very, very important for us to have quality instructional institutions that are teaching what emergency management is, what the past mistakes were, and how we can always learn and get better. And we see this in fire, we see this in law, we see this in EMS and other public safety agencies that have that institutional knowledge. And I think having, like Amanda Wins, for instance, who is a great writer and a thinker in emergency management, yourself, and a couple other people that are out there that I'm losing their mind, and I'm sorry that I forgot to mention you. David McIntyre, not the one who just passed away, but the spelled differently, out of Utah. His writings are fantastic as well. We need to learn from each other, and I think it's very important to really build upon the work that David McIntyre, who just passed away on Monday, what he has done, and build upon that, and be better.
Being better is the key. I mean, you got to constantly, but like I said, it's a conscious decision. You got to make that decision intentionally every day to be better. And not everybody wants to do that. Everybody get a little, they're comfortable. They get comfortable. But as we've seen right now with what's going on in the country, nobody's comfortable anymore. So it changed a lot. And a lot of people who were in positions and should not have been there have been discovered. And that's going to change the type of people that going forward are filling these positions.
I had one of my students who's trying to get a job, and he after getting his bachelor's degree in emergency management, he got his master's in public health, and he was applying for a city job. And one of the questions that was asked of him is with his degree of choice of public health, and they said, well, do you think this is a useful degree for a city? And he explained why he thought it was useful. And one of the people on the panel kind of looked at him scoffingly and said, well, it's a little overkill, don't you think? And kind of left it at that. And I think that, I don't know who this person was, so I don't it's just a story here and coming from this one guy. But the point is if that's a true story, and we'll just take it for what it is, that we need to, as emergency managers, start thinking outside of the typical ICS box, outside of what NIMS and SIMS is, outside of filling out paperwork specifically for the past event and training safely, right? And obviously, when we talk about the gray rhinos in the room, like a pandemic, and if you look at some of the training that we did, where people scoffed at the idea that we could have this worldwide pandemic, they're being proved wrong. So can this event, can the global pandemic, can the nationwide or worldwide protests, if you will, for the George Floyd issue, can those make us stronger as emergency managers and more resilient as a community? And can we build upon this and move forward? What do you think?
Absolutely, and I think we would be doing a disservice if we didn't take this event and turn it into a way to make our community better and more resilient the next time around. This isn't the only time that something like this is going to happen. And the biggest absolute that I hate hearing is that's never going to happen here. Well, guess what? It happened, right? It happened in the whole world. But just think about just our country shut down. Like we shut down. We shut the doors. We pretty much closed everything that we could think of except for essential services. And then that even what was essential services? Even that was in the air. What was going to be allowed? What was not? Who would have ever thought, right? This is never going to happen here. It happened. And it's definitely going to change the face of EM, but it's going to change if you don't take advantage of this as an emergency manager, as a leader of your community, to make your community better, more resilient for the next time something large like this happens. You're not doing your job.
When we're talking about the protests and the riots, if you will, civil unrest, it hit, at least in California. I can't talk about every other state, but it hit almost every community. I mean, even my tiny little town that I live in, they had a protest march. It was very peaceful. There's no throwing rocks or anything like that, but they still did, right? I mean, a couple hundred people, rallied together and walked down the street to the police station and did the silence of, taking the knee and whatnot. But the point is like, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, if somebody said, "Oh, you're going to have those type of protests in your town," I would say, "Oh, you're crazy. This is a tiny little, who cares? No one's going to come over here to protest. There's nothing to protest here necessarily." Right. But it did hit every neighborhood, if you will, and so
They're
again,
linked.
was that?
They're linked. I mean, you got to think that the COVID-19 and the protests were linked. A lot of what happened. I mean, you got to think about that, because then you had the controversy of why is everybody gathering with COVID-19, even though it was a great reason to protest. It was, I can't deny that. But then the controversy rode, and it's still going. How do you justify so many people being in one place with COVID-19? We had a protest here. It started here on our campus, because I work on a college campus. Started on campus and it went downtown, and that was the biggest complaint we got as a college was, how could you allow that to happen? Well, why would we not?
Right.
So yeah, they're linked.
Yeah, I wrote a piece that was titled along the lines of, can we? Well, no, not can we? We can. We absolutely have to be able to protect the First Amendment rights of people, and we can also. It's not mutually exclusive to stop rioters, right? I mean, we can do both. So, I mean, and you're right, but going back to where you said they're linked. That's one of my contentions as well, is that that everything that's been going on with COVID, with everybody being pented, the frustration levels are high already, with not being at work, not knowing, being confused, mixed messages coming across. And I think with the issue that happened with George Floyd, gave people the catalyst, if you will, to go to the streets. I know it was interesting to see some of the pundits complain about the people who, and I hate saying it this way, but this is what their words are, the right-leaning protesters that were out there, protesting, give me my job back and open the beaches and I don't want a haircut. They were very down on them, but yet, when these protesters came out for this, rightfully so. And by the way, I agree with the protest portion of it, that the people are frustrated with some of the issues that are going on out there. For them to come out and protest, it wasn't, the media sometimes kind of spins things different ways. But that being said, some of the stuff that we have to prepare for as emergency managers, we have to take a look at this, saying, when can things, get a little dicey? Again, Michael chimes in and he talks about the Y2K similarities. Oh man, I remember getting prepared for Y2K. But yeah, I mean, again, thinking outside the box, even though Y2K ended up being a big nothing, we had to be prepared for it, right? Because if we weren't prepared for it, if we didn't have the EOCs activated, if we weren't upping, emergency managers and fire and law enforcement for that day with the potential of things going sideways, I mean, we weren't even sure if the electrical grid was going to stay up during that time.
Well, that's the question too. Is did nothing happen, or did all the preparation we do leading up to it fix it? That's the question, people. Yeah.
You're right. Yeah. You're right. That's the question that's always asked. Yeah, did we fix it? I can say, yeah. It's kind of like that whole thing of when you do saturation patrol, and you go, oh, that was a bunch of police officers driving around for no particular reason and it didn't do anything, or did it prevent? That's the question to ask. Oh man, so I know we're getting here closer to the end of our broadcast here. We try to stay within that 30-minute window. I want to thank you so much for stepping up and taking on the role for EM Student. I'm excited to relaunch this show. We'll be launching here in a couple of weeks. Michael, as always, it's chiming in with you and hearing your comments. It's always nice to hear comments down there. And please, when we're doing the EM Weekly Lives, please jump on comment, ask questions. Let's make this thing an open dialogue with everybody back and forth. We're going to be having our guests on here. You can ask good questions to them as well. And it makes us for so much more of a dynamic show than just me sitting here running my mouth talking to other people. Daniel, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.